Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Track 6. I wanted to introduce our next speaker, Johnny Shaieb. He's going to be talking about what CISOs should know about vulnerability management. He's currently the chief architect for X-Force Red, which is IBM's team that does incident response and penetration testing. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Johnny.
Thank you. How's everybody doing? So, my name is Johnny Shaieb, and I'm going to be primarily talking about vulnerability management, but it's such an exciting topic that I had to spice it up with what CISOs should know about vulnerability management. And I'm going to give a little bit of background about me because when I go and listen to people, it's very interesting to see, what their background. Are they just slinging something from a textbook or a framework? Have they ever applied it before? And we'll go over some terms and definitions to get everybody on the same page. And then I'm going to walk you through the battlefields of vulnerability management. And I get a little Sun Tzu. But there's a lot of good ideas. He was an ancient Chinese general, strategist, and it really applies to the digital ecosystem. And then finally, we'll have some Q&A. So I was originally born in Oklahoma, and my two favorite teams are OSU and whoever plays OU, unless it's UT. So sorry, guys, for last weekend. And I've been at IBM for 20 years. And when I first got my first job out of college in summer of '98, I went to work at WorldCom, which later became MCI. So I started at the Unix help desk. Notice I didn't say Linux, I said Unix help desk. And then later, I was brought into the world of Perl programming, and now I just totally dated myself, because I'm not the cool kid that does the JavaScript and the Python, but let me tell you that Python was created in 1989, and Perl was in '87, so they're really not that far apart. So anyway, I got to learn a lot about how DMS 250 switches, DMS 500 switches would work, because the internet, or the voice switch network in the United States, was really created in a diner in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, of all places. So when oil and gas started to not do so well in the late '80s, Bernie Ebbers, the CEO of WorldCom and the president of Williams Energy at the time, said, what are we going to do with all of our pipeline infrastructure? And Bernie was like, well, I have an idea. Have you ever heard of fiber? We're going to clean out all the oil and gas pipelines, use it as conduit to run fiber through it. So that's how the United States wholesale voice network was started. And another interesting fact, that 67% of that wholesale network runs through the heart of Tulsa, Oklahoma, of all places. So anyway, so I went to work at Williams Communications, and I got to do some cool stuff there. And there was this company named VivitNex, and they used to host the Super Bowl out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the network. And then I moved to SAIC to become like a hardcore Unix system administrator, Solaris, AIX, HPUX, the real interesting things. And during that time, when I was finishing my first master's degree, my instructor, and I was taking a class called Digital Cyber Warfare as an elective. And my research paper was breaking into Unix systems. And the books on the list were Hacking Exposed, Volume 1, Digital Cipher Warfare, and The Cuckoo's Egg. So I naturally went to that program, and that was one of the first 5 schools in the United States that started teaching NSA cyber core security. And now pretty much every university teaches it through the Department of Homeland Defense. But at that time, it was Carnegie Mellon, MIT, Georgia Tech, Stanford, and the University of Tulsa. So I'm going to talk to you today about vulnerability management, and I have a special passion for it. In 2017, 2018, I was very privileged to be part of a team that would revolutionize how vulnerabilities would be prioritized. And so one of my first patents ever was prioritizing vulnerabilities according to weaponization. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So anyway, some terms and definitions. NVD, National Vulnerability Database. They kind of enhance the regular vulnerabilities, the CVEs, the common vulnerability exposures. And then you also have CWEs, which is a weakness enumeration. The difference between the two is the CWEs is like a generalized category of software and hardware types of vulnerabilities. And then you have the CVSS score, Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So if you're an executive in the room, like a CISO, for an example, and you use the CVSS score, hopefully by the end of this talk, you will not anymore. And then you have CISA. It's relatively new, but not really. So it's the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and we do sit on the board with them. And then data lakes. For the purpose of this presentation, it's going to be platforms of assets and vulnerabilities, things that you can attach to like a CMDB. So the battlefield. What is the battlefield? The battlefield is a digital symphony of zeros and ones harmoniously talking across assets and devices and people and processes and platforms. And so what does that look like? So whenever you want to, like maybe you have like a taekwondo tournament, or maybe you have a football game or whatever it is, you want to study. You want to prepare. You want to know the battlefield before you play the game. So in vulnerability management, there's a couple different battlefields. But I want you to look at this picture because these are all the major IT towers at companies. You have risk management. You have identity asset management, users and privileges. You have audit compliance. These are the regulations. You know, what business are you in? You have to meet an obligation, otherwise you get fined. You have vulnerability management, discovering assets, discovering vulnerabilities, figuring out what urgency is all about. Remediation management, how do I fix it? How do I mitigate it? You have exclusion management, which is kind of a gray area where, is it a false positive? Okay, we can exclude it. Did you really mitigate it? You know, do you have proof? And then the ones that I really don't appreciate are the accepted risk. Well, we can't do anything about it, but we don't want to hear about it anymore, so just move it over to this bucket and don't have it on my open vulnerability report. And there's finally incident response, trying to isolate and prevent and restore. But what you notice about all these towers, they all have a common denominator. a common dependency, and that's asset management. And asset management's not sexy, maybe because there's no revenue in asset management unless you're like a ServiceNow or Remedy or somebody like that. But asset management can have an effect on your revenue, right? It can be like that control variable where if it gets breached and you don't know about it, then it can be used as a pivot point to take down the network or your crown jewel servers. So getting a little bit deeper into vulnerability management, you have all these adjacent battlefields. And so this is kind of like stacked like a cake, where you have your NIST framework on the top, where you're trying to identify things, whether it's assets that you know about, assets that you don't know about. Same thing for vulnerabilities. You know, once you discover the asset, you're trying to identify if there's any vulnerabilities. You're trying to detect if there's any, if those vulnerabilities are weaponized. You're trying to go and prioritize, because what if the client has like 1 million vulnerabilities, 30% are critical? What are you going to fix first? Well, the CVSS score is certainly not going to help you. The CVSS score is a venerated score, and basically what it means is if somebody were to break in, it would be this bad. But it does not predict risk of exploitation. And being able to respond, the remediation team, being able to parse through those 300,000 records, whittle it down to something realistic, a realistic sizable chunk. In military, we would call that a campaign. Being able to tactically deal with really urgent vulnerabilities. And then finally being able to recover. And what's interesting about vulnerability management, there's all different types of technology sources. IT, you heard the gentleman before me talking a lot about OT, information technology, operational technology, Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things, medical things, Internet of everything, right? And on top of that cake, you have so many different types of artifacts, systems, whether it's an operating system or an application, software, services. And together, you work on identifying all your different technologies and all the different systems that reside on those technologies. And through a collective process of organization, then you're allowed to go and identify, detect, and prioritize vulnerabilities to hand over to the downstream remediation teams to do what? To reduce the risk appetite pyramid. So let's talk a little bit about inventory. So when CISOs, when clients come to IBM and they have a vulnerability challenge, I'm not going to call it an issue, but a challenge, typically what I'm going to see is a big backlog of vulnerabilities. And it's going to be for several different reasons. One is asset inventory. We don't know who the owner is. It's common sense, right? But common sense is not so common, I find. Or maybe there is a lot of end-of-life devices, but we globally farmed out support for those devices, and we're on the fourth derivative of that, and we really are scared to do anything besides reboot it. So those devices aren't going to be touched. So one of my challenges is how am I going to prevent the bleeding, and how am I going to stop the old bleeding? So there's this concept of device activation. Wouldn't it be cool is if any device that comes on the network or a request has to first be requested in like a ticketing system. And that goes in front of a board. And that board says yes or no. And that system is built with a golden image. And once it's built, it goes to the scan team. And the scan team scans it with the traditional vulnerability scan, and also a policy compliance scan, for system hardening. And then if it has an application scan as well. And then all the documentation is in your CMDB. IP address, host name, the assignment groups who supports the server or device or application, whatever it is, where it lives, on the network. Is it internal, external DMZ? Is it the asset criticality, business critical, high, medium, or low? And that is one of the best ways to change the culture of a client. So I always start there, because going and dealing with old inventory, you have to do it team by team. And eventually, everybody will start drinking the Kool-Aid. But one thing I can do is make a drastic change with device activation. And for folks that build devices without going through the proper mandate, they get their hand slapped. So then discovery. So traditionally, in vulnerability scanning, it's pointing a application like a Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7 at a range and seeing what's alive. But that is old school. Why not have a CMDB that has this connector that connects to all these asset-rich inventory data lakes? Because, contrary to popular opinion, even if you can scan the whole range, some of those devices might have a layer 3, 4, or 7 firewall that won't let you, that might pop up in a Big Fix or a Tanium or an SCCM. So you know it's alive, but you just can't get to it. But if you rely solely on a vulnerability scanner to discover, to identify devices, then you're missing a lot of opportunities. And then we get into the interrogation. And this is kind of like the old Venn diagram where, hey, what's in my scan tool? What's in my CMDB? What is there a mutual agreement on, and what's missing? And being able to work through all those data lakes, all those asset inventories. It's not easy, but it's doable. One of my first VMS clients, it's a Fortune 10 company, and they own a lot of banks and very siloed towers. And I had a 3-month lead time to go and figure out a way to go from 8 million vulnerabilities to 3 million vulnerabilities in a 4-month period of time. And it had nothing to do with the scan tool. It had nothing to do with the remediation tool. It was about organization. So, and then network location. Wouldn't it be cool if your asset management, and so this is another mistake that I see a lot, where the CMDB is set up and they will have a default template. In ServiceNow, it's called a configuration item. And you would think, and again, common sense is not so common, you would require IP address, you would require name, you would require network location, you would require asset criticality. You would require the assignment group, the remediation team. But 9 times out of 10, common sense is not so common. Those fields aren't required. So you'll go and you look at somebody's asset inventory. They might have like 10,000 records, but maybe like 5% of them have an assignment group. So then the CISO mandate. I'm doing an assessment for a client right now. It took me 3 months, a 120-page paper of how to resurrect their vulnerability management program. And I was like, I have the blueprint that is utopia for you. We can write white papers together. But I have to have your mandate. I have to have your CISO hammer so I can start with device activation, so I can go and interrogate and find gaps in inventory. And I need your hammer to make that happen, to make sure everybody follows that guidance, you know. And then there is that governance, knowing that there is Big Brother watching, that if you don't follow the directions of this nutcase over here, screaming at everybody, making sure they're doing their job, then you're going to get your hand slapped. So this is the application. So you saw the theory, and this is device activation in a nutshell. For me, I can't just write about it. I need a picture. So this is a common swim lane. It runs from left to right. So if you start in the upper left corner, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Wouldn't it be great if there was a process where you would have this request, and then it would go to a governance board, and they would say yes or no. And you would build that system with a golden image, and it would get scanned, and you have like all your different platforms of whatever you need to scan with. Vulnerabilities are found, a ticket is created. Now you have to get rescanned, and you know, depending on what's on the system. So for sure it's going to have a vulnerability scan, for sure it's going to have a policy compliance scan. And for those of you that don't know the difference is, think of a device as a house. So think of a computer as a house. Or better yet, think of it as a duplex, where you have TCP family on one side of the house, UDP family on the other side of the house. Each family has 65,535 windows and doors that are synonymous with possible ports that can be open, right? And so you're scanning the outside of the house or the outside of the duplex. Same thing for UDP. Scanning the inside of the machine. You know, what software is, you know, installed, and then from a policy compliance point of view, is the system hardened? You know, has the guest password been removed? Are you using at least 16 characters? Is it a strong cipher? And so this is not very difficult, where you have the ability to create a process that creates a culture. Actually, the process creates a habit that creates a culture. And now any device that comes on the network, you have the inventory in 10.1. It's a clean scan. It's a complete policy compliance check. And if they have like a web app or an application, there's a clean, so the system basically gets a clean bill of health. Now you can put it on the network. Common sense is not so common. And there's going to be those that will argue, well, you know, we have so many siloed towers. That's fine. We just need to start with one. And once we get one, we'll go to the next, and we'll go to the next, and we'll go to the next. And suddenly somebody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. So this is that second circle, where traditional discovery scans are fine, but why not use all the data lakes of the client to connect it to your CMDB, where, whatever type of scan tool you're talking about, IT, like a Qualys Tenable Rapid7, or OT, Nozomi Clarity, RMS, or some of your ASMs or your attack surface managements, Veracode, Sneak, software tools that test both DAS and SAS, or dynamic application scanning, and then moving to the hygiene section. These are the tools that go and do the fixing, where you might have your really expensive hygiene tools of your Big Fix and Tanium, right? Or your native OS platforms, tools, your SCCM, Red Hat Satellite Server. Or, this is a very good idea. Why not go out to all the remediation teams and collect their assets too? What's missing? And then you have your network and GRC tools, your SIM. Everything's going into one place. And what are we doing? We're organizing our battlefield. We're figuring out all the different types of technology stacks. Remember, IT, OT, Internet of Things. We're figuring out all of our different devices and systems and software. And then across the adjacent battlefields, we're getting organized from an inventory point of view. We're getting organized to figure out what out of the vulnerability stack is really important. We're going to create campaigns to figure out, to help remediation teams go and have these realistic, sizable chunks that they can go and work on in addition to their change management. And then finally, your reporting, where you kind of gamify it. This team is doing well, and this team is not doing so well. So reporting is really an art too, where you have key risk indicators and key performance indicators. The risk describes the urgency of how badly you need to fix something, and the performance is the mean time to fix. How quickly is somebody responding that you just assigned a ticket to? So this is the interrogation piece. Just look at the three big circles for now. It's a Venn diagram. In everything in the middle, where the red square is, that's where we have a mutual understanding. That's where our CMDB, our scan platform, and our network platforms all say, yeah, we see the same data. But how about the blue square? Well, isn't it interesting that my CMDB and vulnerability platform can see a device that is not seen by the network platform, and vice versa, the green square. My CMDB and network device, my network platforms can see devices that are not seen by the vulnerability scan. And this is where being able to utilize a connector to a CMDB, and I'm not promoting any sort of vendor, it's just one that I see a lot, is they are able to normalize that data. And you're able to see where that data is coming from. Otherwise, you're having a human do this for every single platform. And I've done that before. Thank God for Perl programming. It still works, But I think, like looking at the Sun Tzu statement, you cannot protect what you don't understand or what you don't know. I mean, how many times in the last 10 years was an oil and gas pipeline shut down, or a power grid shut down, or a hospital shut down, or, it's continuous. Did you know that every 17 seconds, a device that's connected to a network is probed, whether malicious or not. It's a battlefield. So let's talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, vulnerability prioritization. So CVSS score, it's a venerated score. But the problem is if you're using it to prioritize vulnerabilities, then you're going to run into an issue where there's going to be a whole bunch of 10s that are like super, super urgent, but they're going to get clubbed together, and you're not going to know which one to fix first. So back in 2017, 2018, a really good friend of mine, Steve Osepik, he had this idea, wouldn't it be cool to 15 minutes, oops. Wouldn't it be cool to automate hacker research? So what we were able to do is we were able to take CVEs and we were able to go and query all the hacker repositories, frameworks, hacktivist groups, and provide numbers. And what I mean by that is, isn't it interesting that like Eternal Blue, the most notorious vulnerability perhaps of the last decade, for CVSS version 1, it's a 9.3. And somebody will probably say, well, how about version 3? I think it's like either an 8.3 or 8.1. It gets worse. But how many weaponized exploits are associated with Eternal Blue? 300 plus, easy. How many are associated with Log4j? 400 plus, easy. And so it provides you a way to look at almost probability-wise if a penetration tester, threat actor, malicious person was going to go and try to break in, that is how close to probable that we can get you. So this is a CVE haystack. There's around 214,000 CVEs. This is as of this morning. It's a little hard to read. But what's interesting is that 4% of this 200,000 is a CVE of a CVSS of 10. And when you look at those CVSSs of 10, you would think every one of them has a weaponized exploit associated with it, but do they? So just looking at those 10s, 75% of them were probably not scored correctly. They have no weaponization associated with them. And so what does that mean is you might have somebody, a remediation team, fixing vulnerabilities of a CVSS of 10 over something that is a 9.3 like Eternal Blue that should be fixed first based on weaponization. And basically the patent is really not that special, but it's being able to use weaponized intelligence, aggregating it onto CVSS score, and then using some other interesting scores of opportune. Is this a particular vulnerability that can be exploited without an exploit, like a default password? Or utility. In the eyes of a threat actor or an X-Force Red penetration tester, how juicy is it? Can I always break in and gain and escalate privilege? Or can I break in, but I can't escalate privilege, but it could be a launching point to something else? Or just as important, is it a 0 and it's not interesting at all? So I'm just going to kind of speed up because I don't have much time left. So remediation management, let's talk about this battlefield. So we talked about vulnerability management and prioritization, right? But there's also exclusion management. That's part of vulnerability management. Oftentimes, I have to educate the client a little bit because it's a partnership. And if I can remove false positives and put them in some sort of exclusion bucket, then what does that do? That reduces the open vulnerability count. If something can't be fixed, but a layer 3, 4, 7 firewall has been added to it internally, then that can probably be a mitigated risk. That could go in the exclusion bucket. Now, I'm not a fan of accepted risk, but the client is always right sometimes. So that's another one. And what's nice about having asset management, you're able to create tickets. And what do tickets do? When you assign somebody a ticket, it creates this layer of a governance by assigning accountability. How am I going to get somebody to execute on a really urgent vulnerability if I don't know who it is? And that's what that ticket does. That's the magic. Being able to assign something to somebody, and then, once a month in the CISO reports, hey, I just assigned Johnny 10 vulnerabilities and the weaponization score is off the charts, and he's not fixing it. And then his boss gets escalated, and his boss gets escalated. And it's all thanks to the ticket. But it wouldn't have happened without asset management. And then we talked about the hygiene platforms and the native OS platforms. And yeah, it's great to have that sort of strategy to where why don't we go and try to let Ansible, BigFix, Tanium, Avante take a stab at it. And if not, let's try to use the native OS platform to try to mitigate or patch. And if that doesn't work, then let's go after it manually. It's a strategy, a stratified layer. And then your metrics reporting, being able to tell the CISO, hey, you know what? There was an influx of vulnerabilities, 100,000 of them, maybe 50 devices were built. And by the way, they were all built with an old image. So you just dumped a whole bunch of new devices on your network that were built dirty. I see this every day. And then that governance hammer comes in, where you built boxes without going through our device activation process. And that's how that culture, starts to tie together. And it doesn't happen overnight. So I know I'm running a little bit over time, but this is the application of it. Being able to where you have your scan. So this is the vulnerability remediation lifecycle, the birth of a vulnerability to its remediation death. Being able to take all that scan data, being able to put it into one platform, because that is very expensive. Asset normalization, data normalization. And then setting up rules using some sort of weaponized intelligence in 2.1 to reprioritize those vulnerabilities according to weaponization, and having rules inside of your CMDB to cut tickets. Not tickets for everything, but tickets for the really, really important stuff. Because remediation teams don't have a lot of resources, and so you're trying to create realistic, sizable chunks of work to get them to fix things with their normal system maintenance. And just kind of fast forwarding, you can see the remediation lane, 4 and 5, where you have your exclusion management, taking vulnerabilities out that have been mitigated or false positives. You have your stratified patching, 6 through 7, right, where you're using multiple different techniques to go and fix. And then finally, you have your metrics governance swim lane, where you have this near-time dashboard. So no throwing Excel sheets over the proverbial wall and nothing gets accomplished, but having near-time dashboards that allows the CISO or remediation team or whomever team to go and look at their data, creating that high fidelity. Because there's nothing more frustrating when a remediation team gets vulnerability data that's not theirs. It creates credibility issues. So the maturity journey. What I like to do is when I go into a client, so this is based on the CMMI maturity model. And I try to find out where a client is in their journey. Rome wasn't built in a day, and that high-octane optimized program can't be built in a day, especially if you don't have that initial framework of asset organization, right? So most of the clients that I get, they either do not have a vulnerability management program or they do, and they're somewhere in here where they have like all the different platforms, but they don't have the processes and procedures, they don't have the thought leadership to put all that together. So why do you want to do this? Well, the average data breach is $4.6 million. And 26%, and it's a little higher now, as of today, 26% of vulnerabilities have some sort of weaponized exploit attached to them. And for CISOs, I was debating whether to start with this or not, but the tenure of a CISO is 17 months. And so my goal has always been to be the CISO's wingman to help, help them have a very mature program, not only for vulnerability management, but you remember the diagram with all the different towers where everybody is utilizing the same framework? So that is all I had. Does anybody have any questions? Did I put everybody asleep? So in the old days, when you were a Unix system administrator or Windows administrator, you were the owner of that device. And that's not the case anymore, especially with containers and cloud technology. And so for the device activation process, whomever is requesting it, part of the sign-off is to say, what is this device used for? Who is the OS owner, who's the application owner, who's the database owner, etc. So that device can't be put into production until, all of that's signed off on. So that's how to stop the new bleeding. But the old bleeding, it's a little bit difficult. And I have found that you really have to start with the remediation teams, because those are the teams that start out in change management, that represent the change. Those are the folks that are going and getting all the approvals from all the different groups. And so that is really time intensive, but once you're able to go and what's neat about ServiceNow, and I think Remedy too, they have like the standard CVS format that you can start plugging the stuff into and batch uploading it into ServiceNow. So process and procedure. What's up? So that's a team sport. And what I mean by that is if I go into a client that I know nothing about, I need a PM on their side that knows everybody. So I always start out with asset inventory. Give me your assets, give me your configuration item template, and then I go to the vulnerability scan team. Give me your data as well. And I start comparing. And if I have a PM that knows who is who, then maybe 8 weeks. And we're talking about like a Fortune 100 company. But like for a smaller company with like maybe 1,000 devices, maybe I mean, it just depends. Like, like how complex is it? But like, I just finished a 3-month project with a very large company in Mexico. That took me, 3 months because I didn't have a PM. It was just me. But I was able to go and find out who was who. So it just depends. If you, it's a team sport. If you have people that are playing with you, then game on. Right, right. And it's, can you imagine where you have a guy that's been in the industry for many, many years who used to be a former auditor that's knocking at your door, you might start sweating bullets. But the first meeting, I don't even ask them about anything IT. I just talk to them about their day. Otherwise, if I start going and talking about this and that, suddenly I'm the enemy and they're not going to be helpful. But again, I don't do like assessments to call people out, but I'm really there to improve programs. Got to be a people person. What's up?
First of all, the slides are beautiful. I'm just wondering if a copy of the slides are available.
If you send me an email,
Okay,
I'll see what I can do.
there you go. Swim lane diagrams.
Yeah. For me, I'm a very visual person, and I have to have pictures. I have some students in here that have taken my hacking class, and it's one thing to have like, bullet point, 1 through 10, here's how to do it. But when you have a picture that shows you how to do it, because you saw the diagram of all the circles, and yeah, that's great for a textbook, but what does that look like in application? Without actually doing it, how do all these interesting pieces fit together? And so that's why I came up with the swim lane many years ago. I wish I would have bought that domain. There was like the swim lane vendor out there,
Yeah. I guess the other thing, I don't know, it's really more of a comment, but I think the thing that strikes me the most about what you presented is it seems like it almost flies in the face of what the current hype cycle is for vulnerability management. This talk that you've just given us seems very much grounded in foundational vulnerability management and CMDB management practices.
Mm.
Rather than selling the latest and greatest tool.
Yeah, like CISOs will come, and I get it. They want to put their brand on something because they're getting paid in upwards of something that starts with a 4. They want to put their brand. They want to bring in the shock and awe campaign, which is fine. But replacing one scan tool for another is not the solution. Replacing one remediation tool for another is not the solution. The solution is to get your house in order, to get organized. And then we'll talk about, what scan tool is the best. I have my opinions, but I mean, vulnerability scan tools, and I don't want to discredit anybody, but vulnerability scan tools, they're all going to do something very similar. There's going to be the signature, there's going to be elements of a vulnerability, and you have this thing called a scanner that's going to go check those elements of a vulnerability, and they might do it a little bit different, but you're going to get, a similar result. In Qualys, they club together a bunch of CVEs. In Rapid7, they do not. In Tenable, it's kind of like a hybrid between the two, And OT is very interesting too, because it's really not about the scanning. You can scan, but it's really about the probing. It's really about the sensing. Because there are protocols that do not exist on the IP TCP stack that a scanner isn't going to do anything to. So there's an art to it. Like, there would be reasons why I might pick a Nozomi over a Clarity over an RMS, depending on, what they have. Because all of their knowledge bases are a little bit different, not like IT. Good? Okay, well, thank you all for your time. And Michael Farnham, if you're watching, thank you.